My name is Madeline Harrison, and the first time my husband's new wife screamed at me to get out of my own house, I was clipping roses in the front garden. The words cracked through the morning air like a gunshot. Get out of my house! I looked up, thorns pricking into my glove, and there she was, Bianca West Harrison. She stood at the wrought iron gate in designer heels far too thin for the gravel path, waving a jangling set of keys like a trophy. Behind her, a pair of movers hovered uncertainly with empty boxes clearly caught between the confidence of her command and the quiet authority of the home around them. She was younger than me by nearly 2 decades, with bleached blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and lips painted an aggressive shade of red. A silk blouse shimmered under the rising sun, and on her wrist glinted a gold bracelet I knew had once been mine. I wiped my palms on my gardening apron and straightened. What did you just say? Bianca tilted her head, that smirk spreading like oil. You heard me. Holden gave me a set of keys. This house belongs to us now. So pack up your memories and move along. She dangled the keys until they chimed. I'm being generous by giving you the morning. Her voice carried sharp and grating like glass dragged across stone. The movers exchanged glances, one muttering something about wrong address, but Bianca's glare snapped them silent. I should have shouted back, or maybe collapsed in tears like she wanted. Instead, I just stared at her. Not at the keys, not at the designer heels that were sinking slightly into the soil, but at her eyes, hungry, restless, almost feverish. Finally, I said softly, "You don't know what you've walked into." The words seemed to unnerve her for a heartbeat, but she recovered quickly. Oh, please. I know exactly what I've walked into: a mansion built on the generosity of a man who finally realized he deserved better. Holden is mine now. His money, his future. This house all mine. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. And you're nothing but a squatter clinging to scraps. The audacity almost made me laugh. Instead, I pressed my lips together and glanced at the house looming behind me. The morning sun lit up its stone facade, every brick laid by my late father's hands, every window frame chosen with my mother's care. It was more than walls. It was a legacy, a fortress of memories. And she wanted to turn it into her trophy case. Bianca mistook my silence for weakness. She motioned for the movers. Go on, start with the living room. That chandelier is hideous. It'll be the first thing to go. Neither man moved. Their eyes flicked from her to me, clearly uncertain. That was when a third figure emerged from the driveway's curve. A tall man in a tailored navy suit, briefcase in hand, steps measured and steady. Bianca's smugness wavered as she noticed him. Who? I smiled for the first time that morning. My lawyer, I said simply. He crossed the path toward us, voice calm but edged with steel. Mrs. Harrison, his gaze deliberately landed on me. Not her. We spoke about this possibility. I'm glad I arrived when I did. Bianca's lips parted in shock, then tightened into a sneer. Your lawyer. Really, what good will that do you? Holden's already changed everything. I have the papers. I have the keys. She rattled them again, but the jingle suddenly sounded hollow. The lawyer opened his briefcase with a soft click, retrieving a thick folder. Keys mean nothing without rightful ownership. And ownership here is complicated. Bianca's painted nails tapped against her silk blouse. Complicated hardly, Holden told me. Holden tells many stories, my lawyer interrupted smoothly. But the law speaks louder than pillow talk. He handed me the folder, heavy with documents. You'll want to hold on to this. I accepted it with both hands, the weight grounding me, steadying me. Bianca's cheeks flushed, her bravado faltering. You can't scare me with paperwork. Holden's meeting me here later, and when he arrives, you'll both see who really holds the power. She turned sharply on her heel, stalking back toward the movers. Bring in the boxes. I don't care what she says. This is my house now. But the men didn't move. One muttered something about needing clearer instructions. The other pointedly avoided her gaze. I stepped forward, my voice quiet but unyielding. This house has seen stronger storms than you, Bianca, and it's still standing. The question is whether you will. She spun back toward me, eyes blazing. You think this is a game? You think you can hide behind fancy lawyers and old bricks. Tomorrow the will is read, and when it is, Holden and I will own everything. You'll be nothing. Her words struck hard, but I didn't flinch. Because behind her, in the long shadow of the driveway oaks, I saw something she couldn't, the outline of more allies arriving. My lawyer wasn't the only one prepared for this battle. Bianca's voice rose again, shrill, desperate. Get out of my house. But the sound no longer pierced me. Instead, it bounced off the stone walls, off the roses, heavy with dew, and dissolved into the morning air. I held her gaze, then glanced at my lawyer, who gave the faintest nod. The game had begun, but not the way Bianca imagined. That night, after Bianca stormed away with her movers in tow, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder my lawyer had placed into my hands, its edges worn from use, its contents a mystery yet to be revealed. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, every chime pulling me back into memories I hadn't wanted to face. The house was silent, but in my mind it was alive with echoes, the laughter of children running through the hallways, my late father's voice booming with pride when he first unlocked the front door. Holden's promises whispered in the dark back when we still shared the same bed. Promises that had crumbled like dust in my hands. I traced the grain of the oak table, remembering how my father had built it with his own hands. He had built this house brick by brick, beam by beam, a monument to family and permanence. And yet, here I was defending it against a woman who saw it as nothing more than square footage and chandeliers to replace. I remembered the day Holden introduced me to Bianca. She had been his secretary then, a sharp-dressed woman with eager eyes and a laugh that was just a little too loud. "This is Bianca," he'd said casually, as though she were nothing more than a background detail. I had shaken her hand politely, even smiled. But something inside me had stirred a quiet unease I couldn't quite name. It wasn't long before the late nights began. Holden always had another meeting, another business trip. And when he came home, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his suits. I told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself marriage was built on trust. But trust, I would learn, is like glass. Once shattered, no amount of patching can make it whole again. The night I found out the truth still burns behind my eyelids. A text message left open on his phone, Bianca's name glowing across the screen, the words leaving no room for denial. My world collapsed in silence. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I walked into the garden, sat among my father's roses, and let the thorns bite into my palms until I felt something real again. The divorce came quickly, mercilessly. Holden didn't fight for custody. The children were already grown, but he fought for assets. He fought for money, for control, for appearances. And Bianca, always hovering in the background, smirking like a cat that had caught the fattest canary, waited patiently for her promotion from mistress to wife. And yet, through it all, this house remained mine. My father had ensured that when he was alive, setting up the ownership in my name untouchable, even through the divorce. Holden hated that. I could see it in the way he scowled at the front door whenever he came to drop off papers or pick up boxes. This house wasn't just stone and timber to him. It was a reminder that he hadn't taken everything. Now Bianca wanted to finish what he couldn't. I rose from the table and wandered into the living room, my bare feet sinking into the worn rug. The chandelier above the one Bianca had mocked earlier sparkled faintly in the moonlight, casting fractured beams across the walls. To her, it was tacky. To me, it was history. My father had chosen it with my mother after weeks of debate, finally deciding on this crystal piece, because as he'd said, it catches the light, the way a family catches laughter. I whispered into the empty room, "You'd hate her, Dad. You'd see through her in an instant." But the truth was, Dad wasn't here. He had passed just a year ago, leaving me not only with grief, but with a house full of ghosts and an ex-husband circling like a vulture. His will was scheduled to be read the next day, and for weeks, I had assumed it was a formality. Now Bianca's smug intrusion made me wonder what traps might be waiting in those sealed envelopes. I returned to the folder on the kitchen table. My lawyer had warned me earlier, his voice careful but firm. There are complications with the estate. Your father was meticulous, but he also knew your ex-husband well. He prepared for contingencies. Contingencies. The word tasted both sharp and sweet. Dad had always been 2 steps ahead, a chess player in both business and life. If he had seen Bianca for what she was then, maybe, just maybe, he had left me more than memories. I pulled my robe tighter around me and stepped out into the garden. The roses glistened under the moon, their petals heavy with dew. My father had planted white roses for me on my wedding day, believing they symbolized new beginnings. Now they felt like reminders of how quickly beginnings could rot into endings. Still, I knelt among them, pressing my fingers into the soil. "You built this house to last," I whispered. "Tell me you built a way to protect it." The night answered only with silence, but deep inside, a flicker of hope stirred. Bianca believed she held all the cards. She had Holden, she had confidence, she had keys. But I had something stronger: the weight of history, the wisdom of a father who never underestimated an opponent, and a lawyer who had walked in at just the right moment. I rose, brushing dirt from my hands, and returned inside. The will reading would come soon enough. Until then, I had one promise to keep repeating to myself. Bianca had walked into a house of memories thinking it was just a pile of bricks. Tomorrow she would learn the difference. By morning, the house had that hollow stillness. Old places get before a storm. Sunlight slid across the foyer marble, warming the photographs that marched up the staircase: birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, my father forever in the middle, a steady lighthouse of a man. I poured coffee into his favorite mug and tried to steady my breath. The will would be read tomorrow. I only needed to hold the line one more day. I didn't get the chance to finish the cup. Tires hissed on gravel. Through the front window, I watched a glossy black SUV nose up the drive like a shark. The passenger door popped open and Bianca's legs appeared first, shiny, impatient, then the rest of her wrapped in a cream suit with shoulder pads sharp enough to cut. A second car pulled in behind hers and my stomach sank at the sight of the logo on its door: Premier Home Design and Staging. 2 stylists hopped out in matching black lugging tape measures and a color fan deck, their eyes alight the way crow's eyes get around anything glittering. Bianca caught sight of me and waved. Not a friendly wave, the kind of wave people give when they're already picturing their reflection in your foyer mirror. Beside her, to my surprise, another familiar figure climbed from the back seat: my brother Daniel. My heart did an unpleasant skip. He had Dad's height and our mother's eyes, but he'd cultivated a coolness I'd never mastered: tailored navy blazer, shaved jaw, voice like a conference call. We hadn't spoken much since Dad's funeral. Grief had a way of making strangers out of siblings. He adjusted his cufflinks, looked up at the house, and exhaled through his nose like a man bracing himself. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "You came early," I said to Bianca, then turned to Daniel. "And you came at all." "I was invited," he said, hands in pockets, avoiding my gaze. "Figured it's best we keep things civil." "That word keeps following me around lately," I said, arching a brow. Bianca let herself in with a bright "good morning" that landed like a slap. "We thought we'd get a head start. The staging team needs measurements. A house like this deserves a fresh eye. Don't you think the chandelier can go to auction? We'll replace it with something understated." She glanced up and sniffed. "Or at least something that doesn't try so hard." I stepped into the doorway, blocking the stylists. "No one is measuring anything." She jangled the keys and I felt the muscle in my jaw tighten. "You don't get to decide that anymore," she said sweetly. "Right, Daniel." My brother shifted. Let's not escalate, he said, eyes darting to me, then to the stylists. We're all adults. Adults don't bring tape measures to other people's houses, I said. Bianca produced a folder with theatrical flourish. Actually, adults bring documents. She slapped it onto the hall table as if serving papers to the house itself. A memorandum of transfer. Holden and I will be taking possession after the will. It's already notarized. I didn't touch it. My lawyer's voice rang in my head. Let them show their hand. Still, the sight of Daniel standing there beside her made something brittle crack inside me. You believe this? I asked him quietly. He took a breath. I think we should hear everyone out. Holden's been part of this family for 20 years. He and Dad were close. Holden and Dad were polite, I said. Dad and I were close. Bianca clapped once crisp. Gentlemen, she said to the stylists, the dining room first. We'll keep the table, maybe repaint the chairs. That rug is tragic. The stylists moved to pass me. I didn't move. If either of you takes a single step into that room, I said low, you'll be measuring floor tile at the county jail. They froze. Bianca's smile flattened. Is that a threat? It's a boundary, I said. Daniel raised both hands. Let's step outside. All of us. He turned to Bianca's team. Guys, give us a minute. Reluctantly, Bianca waved them back toward the porch. We stepped onto the front steps where the air smelled like rosemary and hot stone. Across the street, Mrs. Kent, our HOA whisper network in a turquoise tracksuit, hovered with a leash, and no dog eyes bright as a magpie's. She tilted her head, pretending not to stare. Word would be around the neighborhood before lunch. Bianca lowered her voice. Here's the truth, Madeline. You have sentimental attachment. I respect it. But this house isn't a shrine. Holden and I have plans. There's equity here you aren't using. We'll renovate, sell, reinvest. That's how grown-ups handle legacy. Legacy, I repeated. You keep saying that word like it's just spelling. Daniel cleared his throat. She's not wrong about the math, Mads. The market is... I turned so fast his sentence tripped and fell. You, of all people, should understand what this house is, I said. You learned to walk on these floors. You brought home your first paycheck and put a dent in that banister, dancing like a fool. Dad taught you chess at that kitchen table. I pointed to the window. He taught us both. He flinched just slightly and I felt the tiniest current shift. Bianca sighed. Look, we'll make this easy. We'll give you time to move your little memory boxes. 2 months tops. And because I'm generous, I'll let you keep the garden bench if you're attached to it. I bought that bench for Dad on his 70th, I said. Great, she said, so take it. Mrs. Kent took a bold step closer to pretend to admire my mailbox. A jogger slowed to tie a shoelace that didn't need tying. The neighborhood was an audience now, and Bianca lit up for them, voice syruped with pity. We're doing what's best for everyone. Mads can't maintain a property this size. The taxes alone are escrowed, I said. And paid? I folded my arms the same way Dad used to when a contractor tried to upsell him a problem he didn't have. Bianca's smile faltered. You're being emotional. I'm being factual. She looked to Daniel for backup. He looked at his shoes. My phone buzzed. Avery lit the screen. My attorney. I answered on speaker. Avery, I said evenly, you have an audience. His voice came warm and precise. Then, let me be brief. No one enters for measurements. No one touches fixtures, furnishings, or art. The will has not been read. The property remains in Madeline's name. Anyone who crosses the threshold for non-consensual staging is trespassing. Bianca rolled her eyes. Hi, counselor. Always a pleasure. She lifted the folder again, flapping the notarized page like a sail. Perhaps you didn't hear there's a memorandum of transfer. Memoranda are wishes wearing ties, Avery replied. Possession follows title. And title is not yours. The stylists exchanged a look. One mouthed, let's go at the other. Bianca exhaled sharply and turned away, pacing down the steps to hide her temper. When she spun back, the red in her lipstick looked like war paint. Fine. We'll play nice until tomorrow. But tomorrow, when this house is ours, I'll send someone to help you pack. Seniors get special rates. The word seniors landed with a cheap little thud. I met her eyes without blinking. Bring boxes, I said. You'll need them. Her laugh was high, almost tinny. For what? Your tacky chandelier? For your expectations, I said softly. She stared as if the sentence were a riddle she didn't have the patience to solve. Then she snapped her fingers at her team. We're done here. They retreated to their cars. The SUV door slammed, the engine revved, and the shark slid back down the driveway, tail fin flashing in the sun. Silence seeped into the space she'd vacated, and the house exhaled. Daniel stayed. He watched the road a moment, then rubbed the back of his neck. She's a lot, he said finally. You think? I said. He smiled, quick and reluctant. Mads, I'm just trying to keep things calm. We don't need a public scene. You mean like the one that just happened? I gestured toward Mrs. Kent, who pretended to discover sudden interest in a dandelion. He grimaced. Point taken. We stood there, two siblings on a porch built by the same hands that had taught us right from wrong. The distance between us felt like a canyon. I need to know where you stand, I said. He stuffed his hands deeper into his pockets. Where I've always stood. With what Dad wanted. And what do you think that was? He looked at the front door. His voice softened. To keep us safe. To keep this house what it is. For a moment the canyon narrowed. Then he cleared his throat, putting the space back. I should go, he said. I'll see you tomorrow. He started down the steps, then paused and looked back. Do you still keep Dad's desk in the study? Yes, I said, wary. Bottom left drawer, he said, eyes unreadable. The one that always sticks. My mouth opened, then closed. What about it? He shrugged. Might want to oil the lock. He left before I could ask what he meant. Inside, the study smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon oil. Sunlight fell across Dad's old oak desk, the same one where he'd balanced budgets, and checkmated me into tears more times than I could count. I crouched and tugged the bottom left drawer. It moved an inch, then snagged stubborn as a mule. I felt along the underside out of habit, and my fingers brushed something smooth and cold, affixed with a strip of ancient tape. I peeled it free. A tiny brass key winked in my palm. I sat back on my heels, heart climbing into my throat. Somewhere beyond the window, a mourning dove called soft and deliberate, as if reminding me to breathe. Across the desk blotter lay Dad's chessboard, the queen tipped on her side where he'd left it the last night he played alone. For years he'd say it when life got complicated. Protect your queen. Let the pawns do the marching. The key pressed a crescent into my skin. I hovered it near the drawer's small, almost invisible keyhole and stopped. Not yet. One move at a time. Measure twice, cut once. Dad's voice again. I slid the key into my pocket and stood. The chandelier cast fractures of light across the ceiling, making the room look like it was underwater. Tomorrow, the will. Tonight, quiet. Down the hall, the grandfather clock began its steady count toward noon. Each chime felt like a step onto a board I finally understood. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, as though every brick were leaning closer, listening. I sat at my father's desk in the study, the brass key warm in my pocket. The chandelier in the hallway gave off a faint glow, sending fractured light across the walls like ripples in dark water. I had stared at that drawer for hours, debating. My father was a cautious man, meticulous. If he had hidden something here, it was because he knew one day it would be needed. Still opening it felt like stepping through a door I couldn't close again. Finally, I drew the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock like it had been waiting for me all along. A turn, a click, and the drawer gave way. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, sat a thick envelope. My breath caught. Scrawled across the front in Dad's handwriting, for Mads when they come. My fingers trembled as I tore the flap. Photographs spilled out, first dozens of them. Holden, Bianca, and sometimes even Daniel captured in parking lots, restaurants, unfamiliar offices. My pulse quickened as I sifted through them. One showed Bianca shaking hands with a man I recognized from the county courthouse. Another Holden handing over what looked like confidential files. At the bottom of the pile lay a USB drive. I swallowed hard, slid it into the computer. The screen flickered, then filled with grainy footage. Bianca, her voice unmistakable. Once the old man's out of the picture, we push for control. Holden's history with him gives us leverage. Mads won't stand a chance. Holden's reply low and shaky. What about the brother? Daniel, she laughed. He can be managed. Money always works. The words stabbed deeper than any thorn. I forced myself to keep watching. The video shifted, showing her again, this time with a nurse I recognized from Dad's hospice. Bianca's tone was syrupy but edged with steel. All I'm asking is what Miles wrote in his will. If you happen to mention he wasn't in his right mind, well, accidents happen to memories, don't they? The nurse refused, walking away. Bianca's face twisted into something feral before the clip ended. I pressed pause, leaning back in Dad's leather chair. My chest felt tight. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't grief playing tricks. Bianca had been circling like a vulture long before Dad even passed. Good evening, Madeline. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Avery stood in the doorway, my lawyer's tie loosened, his briefcase dangling. He raised his hands apologetically. Sorry I knocked. No answer. You almost gave me a heart attack. I gestured to the desk. You need to see this. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing as the paused video filled the monitor. So he really did it. He gathered evidence. I nodded. All of it. Photos, recordings. He must have hired someone. Avery's lips pressed into a thin line. Miles always thought 3 moves ahead. He once told me he trusted the law but not human nature. He must have suspected Bianca and Holden would try something. I set the photos down carefully, one by one. She said she'd already bought off Daniel. My voice cracked. What if he... Wait. Avery cut in gently. Look at this one. He picked up a photo, Daniel leaving a building clutching a folded check. His expression was grim, disgusted. He looks upset, I admitted. Not bought, Avery said quietly. Complicit enough to play along but not convinced. It's possible your brother's playing a longer game. I wanted to believe that, but my trust had been eroded too many times. Avery tapped the envelope. This is enough to stall their claims. More than enough to cast doubt. But I think Miles left you more than defense. He left you a trap to spring. I remembered Dad's old words. Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. What kind of trap, I asked. Avery leaned back against the desk, folding his arms. The kind that lets Bianca think she's already won. The room felt colder. The will reading. Exactly. If they try to claim inheritance under false pretenses and the evidence is triggered, everything turns against them. Fraud, attempted bribery, it won't just void their share. It could put them in court for years. I thought of Bianca's smirk, her voice dripping venom. Get out of my house. She had no idea the house was already armed against her. But then I thought of Daniel, his half smile on the porch. Might want to oil the lock. He'd pointed me here. He wanted me to find this. The study clock chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Midnight. Tomorrow the will would be read. I gathered the evidence back into the envelope, clutching it to my chest. Dad really did plan for everything. Avery's gaze softened. Not everything. He couldn't plan for how much this hurts. But he gave you the tools to win. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir that wasn't fear or anger. It was resolve. Bianca thought she held all the cards. Tomorrow she'd discover the deck was stacked against her. The morning of the will reading broke unnaturally bright, the kind of blue sky that makes even bad news look well lit. A white van idled at the curb, Vista Media stenciled on its side. Bianca had brought a camera crew just as Avery predicted. Of course she wanted her coronation captured in 4K. Inside my father's study, the air smelled like lemon oil and old books. The long oak desk had been cleared except for a neat stack of folders and the brass lamp Dad loved. Avery arranged documents with the calm of a surgeon preparing instruments. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. I could feel the envelope in my bag, its edges like a hidden blade. Footsteps and laughter floated in from the foyer. Bianca swept in first in a white sheath dress that dared coffee to spill. Holden followed jaw tight, a sheen of sweat across his brow. The camera crew flared lights, then fanned into the corners like moths who'd learned choreography. Daniel slipped in last and found a quiet patch of wall gaze lowered. Bianca clapped her hands, all gleam and theater. "Let's keep this professional, everyone." Miles valued decorum. She smoothed her hair like a flag being raised. "I think of this less as an ending and more as a transition." Avery didn't look up. "This is a legal proceeding," he said. "There are rules." "Of course," she said, all porcelain and teeth. He cleared his throat and opened the first folder. The last will and testament of Miles Harrison, dated 9 months ago, with a codicil executed 3 days before his death. His eyes lifted to take in the room. "We will proceed in order." The camera's red light winked alive. I heard the producer whisper, audio rolling. Avery read the formal preamble, then the bequest's gifts to the Historical Society, a scholarship in my mother's name, small legacies for staff who'd stayed with us for decades. Bianca's smile wobbled, then snapped back in place when Avery reached the clause we all knew she was there for. "To my daughter Madeline and to my former son-in-law Holden, now married to Bianca West." Bianca's shoulders hitched victorious. "I leave the residual estate, including the Harrison House Company shares, and liquid accounts to be divided as follows: 60% to Madeline, 40% to Holden and Bianca jointly." Holden let out a thin, disbelieving laugh. Bianca turned to the nearest camera and tilted her chin with a wet shine in her eyes, the practiced gratitude of a pageant queen. "Miles," she said, soft enough for the boom mic to catch, "we'll take good care of it." My heart thudded once heavy. I felt Daniel's stare burn into the side of my face. I didn't move. Avery lifted a hand. "The will also includes the codicil." He laid a sealed envelope in the center of the desk. "To be read only after any beneficiary has signified acceptance of the above bequests." The room shifted subtly like a ship hitting a sandbar. Bianca's smile froze. "What does that mean?" "It means," Avery said mildly, "if anyone chooses to accept their share, we immediately read the codicil." Holden squared his shoulders. "We accept," he said quickly, as if speed could outrun doubt. He reached for a pen. "Where do I sign?" Avery slid forward a single-page acknowledgement. Holden signed with a flourish he probably used on autographs in better days. He passed the pen to Bianca, who leaned over the page and dotted the I in her name like she was crowning it. "Wonderful," she said, glancing up at the camera. "We're honored." Avery broke the red wax seal on the codicil. The rip sounded louder than it should have. He unfolded the page, eyes flicking line to line. "In the event that any beneficiary should accept inheritance under this, will I direct that an immediate forensic review be initiated into certain financial irregularities discovered in the months preceding my death." He paused, then continued, steady as rainfall. "I further direct that any and all evidence of fraud, coercion, or undue influence related to my estate be turned over to the district attorney, and that acceptance of the bequests herein be considered acknowledgement of this condition." Holden's pen fell clattering against the desk. Bianca's voice came out in a thread. "Irregularities." Avery opened a second folder, the one I'd handed him last night. Photographs slid across the wood in a neat fan. Bianca in a parking lot with a courthouse clerk. Holden entering a competitor's office with a folder tucked under his arm. Bianca leaning too close to the hospice nurse, jaw sharp, eyes mean. "What is this?" Holden asked, but the oxygen had thinned and the words arrived late. Documentation, Avery said. He set a small USB on the blotter. There's also video, offers of money for testimony about Miles's mental state, attempts to access confidential medical records, emails suggesting a coordinated plan to influence the estate. The producer stepped forward before instinct pulled him back. The camera's red eye caught everything, the photographs, the USB, Bianca's shock calcifying into anger. She pointed at me. You planted this. I shook my head once. Dad collected it. I looked at the lens because I knew she would hate that. He saw you clearly. Bianca's poise trembled. This is entrapment. Entrapment is a criminal defense, Avery said calmly. What you're thinking of is a trap. And if so, it only closes on those who walk into it. Holden snatched a photo, stared at it, then at Bianca, then at me. You filmed us. Your father hired a private investigator, Daniel said unexpectedly from the wall, voice low but carrying. And he told me to watch. Bianca whirled. You! Daniel didn't drop his gaze this time. You tried to buy me, Bianca. You handed me a check and told me all I had to do was say Miles wasn't of sound mind. He looked at Avery. I brought it to Dad. He was disappointed. Not surprised. Bianca's breath started to come fast. She turned to the camera crew. Turn those off. No one moved. Avery tapped the codicil. By accepting you triggered disclosure to authorities. Law enforcement is waiting in the foyer. If you'd like to decline your inheritance to avoid the review, you may say so now. Holden swallowed. Decline. Bianca slammed both palms on the desk. We accept. She spat the decision, more reflex than reason. You think you can scare me with old man games? Avery inclined his head. Very well. He pressed a key on the laptop. Video bloomed on the monitor, Bianca in profile, the hospice nurse's badge visible. Accidents happen to memories, her recorded voice purred. Then a second clip, Bianca to the courthouse clerk, a white envelope visible between their hands. I just need to know when the will is filed, sweetheart. Consider it. Appreciation. Turn it off. She lunged for the laptop, but Daniel was there, first palm, out, gentle and immovable, the way Dad used to hold a rook in place to show a child the line they'd missed. Bianca's polish cracked. This is a setup, she hissed. This is her. She jabbed a finger at me, trying to steal what I earned. You earned nothing. I said the words even cold, so unlike the ones I'd whispered to roses in the dark. You trespassed into a life and called it equity. Holden sagged into the nearest chair, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. Bianca, he said softly, a warning or a plea I couldn't tell. She rounded on him. Don't you dare. You promised me. A firm knock resounded from the foyer, 2 beats, then a third. Avery didn't look away from Bianca as he called, Come in. 2 officers entered, hats tucked under arms, faces, professional eyes everywhere. Ms. West Harrison, the taller one, said, We're here to ask some questions regarding potential fraud and attempted bribery related to the Harrison estate. Bianca laughed, a bright, brittle, frightening sound. You can't arrest me in my own home, she said. It isn't, I answered, and they didn't. The camera hummed softly, a mechanical witness that neither comforted nor judged. In its glass eye, I saw the room as a tableau, Bianca's white dress like a flag surrendering to daylight, Holden's crumpled suit, Daniel standing taller than I'd seen him in years, Avery steady as a metronome, and the oak desk where my father had once taught us how knights move in L-shaped patience. Ms. West Harrison, the officer repeated, Please come with us. Her chin lifted unbroken to the last. This isn't over, she said to me as they took her elbow. I met her stare and felt the old fear burn out at last. For you, I said, it's only beginning. They led her from the room. The camera followed until the doorway swallowed them. Silence fell, full, ringing, almost sacred. Holden rubbed his face with both hands. I'm going to call an attorney, he murmured, finally looking at me. There was shame there, tangled with something like relief. Madeline. I. Save it, I said gently. Use your words where they matter. He nodded once small and left with the second officer. The lights dimmed the crew, uncertain, glancing between producer and exit. Avery closed the codicil and slid it into a new folder marked Filed. I exhaled, and in the release I heard my father's voice as clearly as if he were standing behind me. Protect your queen. Let the pawns do the marching. I looked to Daniel. He was watching me openly now, the canyon between us narrowed to the width of the desk. You knew about the key, I said. He nodded. Dad told me you'd find it when you were ready. He tried a smile. You were. Outside, somewhere beyond the live oaks, the afternoon wind picked up, setting the old house to its faint wooden murmurs, the sound of a place remembering itself. The house never sounded the same after Bianca's heels were escorted across its threshold. The slam of the front door behind the officers echoed like a gavel strike, final and resonant. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the air tasting like someone else's perfume. Holden remained in the study, shoulders slumped, staring at the photographs spread across the desk. The camera crew had retreated into the hall, whispering frantically with their producer about what to do with the footage. Avery closed his briefcase with a decisive snap, signaling the proceeding was over. But the fallout, no, the reckoning was only beginning. Holden rubbed his temples. She told me she could handle everything, he muttered. His voice sounded small, stripped of bluster. That Miles trusted me. That this house was as much mine as yours. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. And you believed her? He met my eyes for a fleeting second, then looked away. I wanted to. After everything between us, after the divorce, I needed to believe someone saw me as more than a failure. He exhaled, ragged. She played me, just like she played everyone. A bitter laugh slipped out of me. That's the first honest thing I've heard you say in years. Daniel moved closer, resting a hand on the back of Dad's old leather chair. Madeline, he may have been blind, but he wasn't the mastermind here. Bianca was always the one steering. Steering or not, I said sharply. He grabbed the wheel. Holden's jaw clenched, shame written across every line of his face. I'll cooperate, he whispered. With the investigators, the DA, whoever. I can't go down with her. Not like this. You already did, Daniel said quietly. The difference now is whether you stand back up. Before Holden could answer, commotion sounded in the foyer. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. One of the officers reappeared, face set like granite. Ms. West attempted to flee once outside, he said. We have her secured, but she caused a scene. The media picked it up. Perfect, I thought. The very cameras she invited to record her triumph would now broadcast her downfall. Dad would have appreciated the symmetry. The producer poked his head into the study, cheeks flushed. Ms. Harrison, he said carefully, we captured everything. The signing, the codicil, the evidence, even the arrest. It's compelling content. But well, the network won't air it without your permission. Avery's brow furrowed. That decision should wait. This is still an active investigation. I held up a hand. Keep the footage safe. If Bianca tries to spin her story, we'll have the truth ready. I looked at the producer until his Adam's apple bobbed. Understood? Yes, ma'am, he said quickly, retreating like a scolded child. Silence settled again. Holden dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Daniel sank onto the sofa, staring at nothing. I remained standing, unwilling to let fatigue dull the edge of my resolve. Dad's voice echoed in my mind. Never mistake silence for peace. Mads. Sometimes it's just the moment before the other side caves in. And cave in they did. By evening, the news had spread beyond our neighborhood. Local stations ran breaking segments with headlines like Heiress exposes estate plot and businessman's widow arrested in fraud scheme. Footage of Bianca shouting mascara streaking down her cheeks looped on repeat. Holden's name trailed hers in every headline, though the anchors spoke of his cooperation with authorities clearly drawing lines between the guilty and the salvageable. Avery returned to the study after taking a call. The DA's office is moving fast, he reported. Bank accounts are frozen. They've already subpoenaed her correspondence. It's over. Over, I repeated. The word felt heavy, too final. She won't go quietly. She doesn't have a choice anymore, Avery said. Everything she did, bribery attempts, forged documents, manipulation of medical staff. She trapped herself the moment she signed that acceptance. I glanced at Daniel, who was studying the photographs again. His voice was low. She told me once over drinks that legacy is just money, dressed in sentiment. I thought she was just being cynical. Now I see she meant it. She underestimated Dad, I said, and she underestimated me. Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. You're stronger than she ever understood. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. Reporters, neighbors, even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years wanted a statement. I ignored them all, pulling on jeans and a sweater, heading straight to the garden. The roses gleamed with dew-white petals tipped in red where thorns had caught me the night before. I bent down, brushing soil from a bloom, and whispered, "She thought she could uproot you, but you're still here." Behind me, footsteps crunched on gravel. I turned to see Daniel, hands in his pockets, face softer than I'd seen in years. "I stopped by early," he said. "Didn't think you'd sleep much." I didn't. I straightened. Too many ghosts pacing these halls. He smiled faintly. Dad would say they're not ghosts, just memories waiting to be heard. For the first time in a long while, the words didn't sting. Later that afternoon, Holden returned, not with arrogance, but with resignation. He carried a thin envelope and placed it on the desk without meeting my eyes. "What's this?" I asked. "My statement for the DA," he said. "Everything I knew, everything I suspected, signed and dated. I figured, you should see it first." I slid the papers free. It was all there. Confessions of meetings, Bianca's manipulations, her obsession with the house. The words bled guilt, but also a strange kind of relief. "You're finally telling the truth," I said. He nodded. "Maybe a little late, but better than never." "Maybe," I said. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "Madeline, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll at least believe I tried to make it right." I didn't answer. Some debts are too old to collect. By week's end, the house was quieter. The news cycle had moved from scandal to sentencing. Bianca's face, once painted across glossy magazines on Holden's arm, now stared out from mugshots, hollow-eyed and furious. She had screamed, she had threatened, she had denied. But the law didn't bend for tantrums. And with every new revelation, embezzlement, bribery, fraud, the walls of her empire crumbled brick by greedy brick. The collapse was total. And yet, standing in the study beneath the chandelier she despised, I felt no glee. Only a deep, abiding calm. She had tried to strip me of everything: my marriage, my brother, my father's house. In the end, she had only revealed the strength of what she could never touch. Legacy. Not money, not equity, not chandeliers. Legacy was the soil beneath my nails, the echo of Dad's laughter in these halls, the knowledge that the truth, like roses, survives thorns. Tomorrow, I knew, would be for rebuilding. But today, it was enough to watch the storm she conjured finally collapse around her. The house was mine again. Not because of papers, not because of courtrooms, not even because of the trap Dad had left. It was mine because I finally felt it breathe with me instead of against me. The walls no longer strained under the weight of Bianca's ambition. The garden no longer seemed like a battlefield. The silence, once oppressive, was finally peace. A week after Bianca's arrest, the study became the center of something different. Not strategy, not fear, just family. Daniel sat across from me at Dad's desk, a mug of coffee steaming in front of him. His portfolio was open not with schemes or bribes, but with letters he'd started drafting donations to the scholarship fund restoration plans for the library wing Dad loved. "You're really doing this?" I asked, scanning one of the drafts. He nodded. Dad wanted more than money shuffled around. He wanted people to remember him for what he built. I think we should honor that. For the first time in years, I reached across the desk and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." His smile was weary but genuine. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The garden became my refuge again. I spent hours pruning the roses, whispering to them the way Dad once had, as if the blooms could carry my words into the soil and root them deep. The white petals swayed in the breeze, no longer stained with anger, but washed clean with morning dew. Sometimes when the light hit just right, I swore I saw him kneeling beside me, gloves on shears in hand. His voice echoed like a benediction. "The roses need a firm hand, Mads, but never a cruel one." I smiled, pressing my palm to the earth. "I'm learning, Dad. Finally." Holden's cooperation shaved years off his sentence, but he still faced prison. The day before he turned himself in, he stopped by unannounced. For once, he didn't swagger. He didn't beg. He just stood in the doorway like a man who finally saw himself clearly. "I wanted to say goodbye," he said quietly. I nodded. "Goodbye, Holden." He searched my face, perhaps for anger, perhaps for forgiveness. I offered him neither, only the truth. "You were part of my story, but you're not the ending." His eyes shone, and for the first time in decades, he had no answer. He turned, walked down the path, and was gone. The press circus burned out quickly. Scandals always did. Soon the neighborhood returned to normal rhythms, Mrs. Kent walking her invisible dog, the jogger, who never tied both Lace's children, chasing ice cream trucks in the cul-de-sac. They still whispered when they passed the Harrison house, of course, but now the whispers had a different tone. Less pity, more awe. Sometimes people would stop and ask if I planned to sell. I always smiled and shook my head. "This isn't just a house," I'd say. "It's a legacy." And though they never fully understood, I did. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch, wine glasses in hand. The sky blushed with sunset, painting the roses gold. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "Bianca thought she won the moment she held those keys." "Funny thing about keys," I replied. "They only work if the door belongs to you." He chuckled, clinking his glass to mine. "Here's to Dad. To the lessons he left behind." We sipped in silence, the kind that was finally companionable. Later that night, I found myself in the greenhouse, tucked beneath the orchids, just where Dad had said was one final envelope. My heart raced as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, simple and direct. "My dearest Mads, if you're reading this, the storm has passed. Don't let bitterness take root where love should grow. This house is strong, but it's you who carries its true foundation. You survived betrayal, deceit, and greed, but you did not let it break you. That is the legacy I hoped to leave. Not wealth, not walls. You. Keep the garden alive, Maddie. It will keep you alive in return. Love always, Dad." Tears blurred the page, but for once they weren't heavy with grief. They were light, cleansing like spring rain. In the weeks that followed, I reopened my flower shop, Harrison Gardens Reborn. Customers who had seen the scandal on television now walked in curious, then stayed for the warmth of fresh blooms and the laughter that always seemed to fill the air. My hands, once clenched in anger, now found solace in arranging roses, lilies, sunflowers. Every bouquet felt like a small victory. Every smile from a customer felt like Dad winking from somewhere unseen. Standing on the porch one afternoon, watching neighbors stop to admire the roses, I realized the truth. Bianca had thought she was fighting for money. Holden had thought he was fighting for pride. But I, without even realizing it, had been fighting for peace. And peace, once won, is worth more than any estate. So here I am in the house my father built brick by brick, surrounded by the roses he planted with hope. Bianca is gone. Holden is paying his debts. Daniel and I are rebuilding what was broken. The house hums with life again. And if you're listening, whether you've lost something, fought through betrayal, or stood your ground against impossible odds, I want you to remember this: legacy isn't money, it isn't property. Legacy is the love you protect, the truths you honor, and the peace you fight for. So hold on to your own house, whatever form it takes. Guard it fiercely, nurture it tenderly. And when someone waves keys in your face, remember real power doesn't come from holding them, it comes from knowing who you are inside. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that strength can bloom even in broken places. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join me here again. Because some stories are warnings, some are lessons, and some, like this one, are reminders that the truth always finds its light.